It is time now for our new weekly segment, AI Decoded. Welcome to AI Decoded. It is that time of the week when we look in depth at some of the most eye-catching stories in the world of artificial intelligence. Now, last week we looked at how artificial intelligence could threaten human jobs in the future. But what about those on the battlefield? Well, The Guardian is calling it AI's Oppenheimer moment due to the increasing appetite for combat tools that blend human and machine intelligence. This has led to an influx of money to companies and government agencies that promise they can make warfare smarter, cheaper and faster. And here in the UK, leading military contractor BAE Systems are ramping up efforts to become the first in their industry to create an AI-powered learning system meant to make military trainees mission-ready sooner. Now, our BBC AI correspondent, Mark Chizak, went to meet all those involved. We will be showing you his piece in just a moment. But with me, I'm very pleased to say, is our regular AI contributor and presenter, Priya Lakhani, who's CEO of AI-powered education company Century Tech. Now, Priya, this is a fascinating area, but perhaps one of the most controversial, and people have huge concerns about it.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, because this is using AI to potentially have unmanned military drones. What you're going to see in Mark's incredible piece is unmanned military warcraft, potentially. And then there's, all these questions about, well, hang on, obviously it's great if there aren't humans being harmed out there on the field, but does that mean that actually war could escalate much quicker? Are decisions then going to be made by these AI systems? If both parties have AI systems, what happens then? It's sort of a race as to who can escalate further. And so there's all sorts of ethical considerations. But you're also going to see learning systems and how BAE Systems are approaching using AI to improve learning in terms of training the military and soldiers. So it's a fascinating area. And then we'll do a bit of a deep dive into the ethics a little bit later in the programme.
Lots to talk about, Priya. So let's take a look, as we were just talking about, this report by Mark Chizak, and then stay with us because we've got lots to discuss afterwards.
Up, down, flying, or hovering around. For 75 years, the Farnborough Air Show has showed off aircraft, both civilian and military, often inviting pilots to put their aeroplanes through their paces, to the delight of the assembled attendees, including plane buffs, even new prime ministers. In recent years, Farnborough has played host to a lot more of these unmanned air vehicles, or drones as they're commonly known. Drones with military application, with fixed wings that behave like an aeroplane, or rotors capable of hovering like a helicopter, are in abundance. But all have something in common. A human being involved in the command and control of these aircraft at some stage. It's a process that's called human in the loop.
It's critical from a moral and ethical point of view to ensure that there is a human judgment that is always at the heart of selection of the course of action.
Military application of AI is extremely controversial. Images of killer robots and the idea of AI run amok are frequent additions to stories in the press about the risks the technology poses. Nevertheless, militaries around the world are already using artificial intelligence. One area where it's particularly useful is training pilots to fly aircraft like these. Flight simulators are an integral part of a pilot's training. They save time and money, allowing prospective pilots to gain valuable skills from the comfort and safety of terra firma. Formerly with the RAF, Jim Whitworth is a pilot instructor experienced in flying military jets like the Hawk and Tornado.
As soon as you see that, I want you to just pull the stick back, set an attitude as we discussed.
This simulator rig is for a Hawk jet, the Royal Air Force's preferred trainer. What sort of feedback have you given to the team developing this in terms of its realism?
So really it's about the feedback from the controls. I would like it to feel as much like a Hawk as possible.
Where does the AI come into the mix?
We can record everything a trainee does in this environment, in this simulator. We can give some metrics with which to measure the performance and then score each performance. And then as we start to build up data on each trainee, artificial intelligence can then start to analyse that data for us and show us where our pinch points in the syllabus are. And by that I mean where each trainee is struggling, where perhaps we might want to refine a piece of training, either courseware material or technique from the instructor to try and make that training as successful as possible.
Greatest advantage of learning to fly like this is that when I need to get back down on the ground, I can hit a few keys, take the headset off, and I'm good to go. Synthetic training isn't exclusive to aircraft. Nearly every element of the battlefield and its surrounding environment can be simulated. The software powering these tools has evolved from the same tech as video games. The addition of AI allows the environments to behave in a much more realistic way, even replicating civilian activity. How does AI help in simulation?
It's really difficult to replicate real-life scenarios. It's very difficult to get enough space to do the training in. It's very difficult to get enough assets available, particularly if they're on operations. We can make them incredibly complicated scenarios, and the AI can then create the complexity that they need to train against.
When it comes to aerial combat training, new AI-powered adversaries are proving to be a challenge, even for experienced pilots.
Definitely puts you through your paces. It puts you in positions that you've not traditionally seen before. It fights a different doctrine that we've not necessarily trained against. So I think it's going to become the future. OK,
Piers, headset on and put it through its paces. Piers Dudley used to fly the RAF's most advanced fighter, the Typhoon. He's about to fly a virtual version of the same jet in aerial combat against a system created by developers from Cranfield University. It's called the AI-aided tactics engine. Yeah. So if your opponent is also a human being, there's something at stake for both of you, your lives are at stake, but if your opponent in the real world isn't a human being, does that change things for you as a human pilot?
The AI is learning and is adapting to your reactions, so therefore it becomes quite difficult to train against. If you're fighting against other real-world aircrew, you potentially know the training that they've been through, you know almost what to expect, whereas against this, you just don't know what to expect with it.
The AI engine has come out on top. Now it's my turn to take on an AI Top Gun. Where did he go? I lost him. Gotta get some altitude. Outmaneuvered at every turn, the AI made quick work of this novice pilot. He's just too elusive. Pilots aren't just learning from the AI, in turn, it's learning from them too. It's refining skills which one day may be used to pilot drones in real-world situations. A scenario that for many presents a significant moral and ethical risk.
Yeah, that risk associated with technology is a critical area. It's not new. Every technology that's been deployed in defence has a risk associated with it, and there's a very well-established moral, ethical and legal framework around how we evaluate the risk of any new capability alongside the operational capability and the imperative to use it.
But what happens if an adversary doesn't play by the rules, if they don't play by the rules of engagement, or they don't play by the same ethical frameworks?
We don't assume that our adversaries will play by the same rules that we do. But because we understand the technology, we understand how you would go about deploying autonomy outside of that framework. And when we understand the technology and the approaches they would use, we can understand the techniques we would use to counter that, to defeat that threat.
This is a glimpse of the future. It's called Tempest, a joint collaboration between the UK, Italy and Japan. This proposed 6th-generation stealth combat jet will have advanced radar and weapon systems, as well as flying with its own mini-squadron of drones. the Tempest acting as a flying command and control centre at a distance while the drones perform missions semi-autonomously. Which begs the question, how long will the human being remain in the loop?
Oh, I told you it was interesting. That was Mark Chesak reporting there. Now, coming up, we will delve deeper into the issues surrounding AI on the battlefield. We will be speaking to Mikey Kay, a former senior RAF officer in the British military, and Dr. Peter Azzaro from the Campaign to Stop Killer Robots, a coalition of non-governmental organisations who seek to preemptively ban lethal autonomous weapons. Join us for all that on AI Decoded after this short break. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Welcome back to AI Decoded. Now, we just had a glimpse of how defence manufacturers are using AI-powered military training tools to train the next generation of fighter pilots. But are we in danger of handing too much autonomy to these relatively untested systems? Well, joining us now are Mikey Kay, a former senior RAF military pilot, and Dr. Peter Azzaro from the organisation Stop Killer Robots, who's also a professor at the New School in New York, where his research focuses on artificial intelligence and robotics. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us here on AI Decoded. And Mikey, perhaps if I can start with you and ask just to give us a quick rundown of your understanding of how AI technology is being used on the battlefield at the moment.
I think a really good example is a process called the kill chain, which is a procedural approach to the precision-guided munition process. And what that does, basically, it assists with the identification and selection of a potential threat. And then the approach looks at what's called the CDE, the collateral damage estimate, and it will look in the vicinity of what the target is. Let's say, for example, 2 Islamic State snipers on the second story of a 30-story building. And then it will assess potentially what components within a certain radius of that target could be or could form some form of collateral, whether that is endangering human life or endangering infrastructure. At the same time, you've got a significant amount of intelligence that is going into this process, whether that's human intelligence, which is intelligence you get from informants, or whether it's imagery intelligence or electronic intelligence, so listening, tapping into phones or listening to radio frequencies, or looking at imagery from predators. Then it will go into weapon selection, and it will basically look at what type of weapon, whether it be a bomb from a platform like a fast jet, or whether it's an artillery cell, which is precision guided from a tank. It will look at what type of weapon is the most appropriate in order to minimize that collateral, and various governments will have various differing tolerance policies on that. And then it will also bring into all of that what the rules of engagement are in terms of being able to prosecute that target. So AI can, across all of those areas, including the battle damage assessment, which is effectively taking a photograph after the bomb's hit, it can inform all of those components of what is commonly called in military parlance the kill chain.
OK, let's go to Dr. Peter Azzaro, and just to, I mean, your organisation is called Stop Killer Robots, which perhaps gives people an idea of where you're coming from in this. The film that we have just seen is about how AI is being used to train pilots. Do you have a problem with AI being used in that sort of capacity, or do you want AI not to be used at all when it comes to battlefield training and effectiveness?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of valid applications of artificial intelligence across many different domains, from medicine to healthcare, and even in the military for logistics and training and things like that. We're really focused on autonomy in weapon systems and ensuring that humans are ultimately making the decision to use lethal force and determining what is a valid and lawful target in armed conflict. And we've been working at the UN for more than a decade trying to get a treaty there. But there's, of course, many different kinds of applications, and there's been a lot of debate around exactly how to define these systems. As we just heard from the video and the previous speaker, there's a lot of different ways to integrate these into the complex operations of the military, which involves a lot of data, a lot of computers, a lot of people making decisions at different levels of command and control. So it's challenging to find ways to really regulate how that happens and ensure that humans remain in control.
So, Mike, I have a question for you, because presumably one of the areas that the military is trying to achieve better, is like less civilian harm, right? We know from the UN that the civilian casualty ratio is about 9-1, so 9 civilians to 1 combatant. But making precision targeting theoretically more possible doesn't necessarily mean that the impact on mitigating risks to civilians is more probable, because when it comes to using artificial intelligence, it's about speed. So if both parties have artificially intelligent trained weapons or drones, and they're using this technology, speed is key in the process. And so we saw from, for example, Lavender, which is the AI system used by the IDF, sources alleged that actually they increased the number of civilians that they were permitted to kill when they were targeting a potential low-risk militant to 15 to 20 civilians, and they would drop a bomb on an entire house and flatten it to try and achieve their goals. So what do you think about AI making war actually more destructive in this sense and not helping us when it comes to reducing civilian harm?
Well, Priya, what you're talking about there is the collateral damage estimate, and the collateral damage estimate varies from government to government. I think it's quite obvious. If you look at the tolerance policy of the IDF, it's significantly different from experience of what the tolerance policy was of, say, the UK when it was operating precision-guided munition strikes in Iraq or Afghanistan. And I was part of that kill chain process in Baghdad over 3 tours. So I'm incredibly familiar with that, and I'm incredibly familiar with the collateral damage estimate and what the rules of engagement are. Where AI can improve this, and you're absolutely right when you talk about speed, speed is of the essence. So if you do have an imminent threat to life or to infrastructure, neutralizing that threat through speed and accuracy is where AI can help improvements. So the collateral damage estimate, for example, AI will be able to speed up that assessment of what the potential collateral damage is. And when we're talking about collateral damage, I'm talking about a school potentially within the radius of impact of a certain weapon, or a bus passing by at a certain time of the day. And that's where what's called pattern of life comes in, which is effectively drones overhead of target, looking at what the pattern of life is of various components surrounding that. So speed is critical. Selection of the weapon and the speed at which the weapon can be selected from the rules of engagement, from the collateral damage estimate, is critical. So AI, for me, will speed up and make that process more accurate. But ultimately, the very high top-level tier has to be the government's tolerance policy on what it's willing to accept in terms of loss of life.
And at the moment, we've talked a lot about human in the loop. So the slowest and therefore the weakest link here would arguably be the human in the loop. Is there then a risk that the human will be cut out of the process?
Well, you're talking about speed, and potentially the human could become the slightly slower component of that. But then what's a critical component to think about is accuracy and ethics. And AI isn't there yet. Will it ever get there? I'm not sure. There are those that argue it will. There were those that argue that you will always need a human in the loop to give that overlay of what the ethics are, what the rules of engagement are. The scenarios are very different. Prosecuting different targets in different environments with different platforms, different weapons. I gave the example of 2 Islamic State snipers on a second floor of a 30-story building. The human has the ability to be able to select a weapon through technology, through machine learning, but also put, for example, a steel tip on the top of that weapon called a penetrator. So it can go through 28 floors to the second floor with a delayed fuse on it and just take out what's on the second floor without destroying anything else. So it is a massively, massively complex procedure of which AI will be learning how to do that. But my advice, and certainly the way I would approach this, is that a human in the loop right now is imperative in order to minimize that collateral and minimize potential mistakes. And mistakes do sadly happen quite a lot.
Yeah, and we haven't talked about the transparency of that either, in the sense that a lot of this is classified intelligence. You know, would defence contractors be liable? Peter, I've got a very quick question for you. We're running out of time, but war games show that the use of machines are likely to result in conflict escalating quicker than it would otherwise. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, as you said, with the speed, right, decision-making happens in shorter and shorter time frames. The real difficulty is when more and more strategic decision-making and decisions to engage a target or initiate an operation become automated, and you actually would have humans that would not be in control of the overall planning, the decisions to go to war, the decisions to escalate a conflict could all just sort of happen automatically. And we've seen this already with online trading and flash crashes that have occurred in stock markets where different algorithms will interact with each other and lead to a stock market crash, and they have to turn off the whole system. We don't want this happening with autonomous systems in warfare. But I think to the question you asked before about precision weapons, I mean, what we know is this is automation, and automation increases speed. It also reduces cost. By reducing the cost of bombing each individual target, that means you can afford to bomb a lot more targets. So if you're only killing, a certain percentage of civilians with each strike, but now you can strike many, many more things, you can actually wind up having a much larger impact on the civilian population, even though you've increased precision. So it's not automatic that these systems will improve warfare in any impact on civilians.
Dr. Peter Azzaro, I'm going to have to stop you there. I'm sure we could talk about this all evening. It's an absolutely fascinating subject. We really appreciate your time. Dr. Peter Azzaro, Mikey Kay, thank you. And here in the studio, Priya, thank you so much for joining us. That's it. We are out of time. AI Decoded will be taking a well-deserved break for the month of August. But don't worry, we will be back in full force at the beginning of September. So do please join us then.